This is the Health City Podcast. Healthcare insights from healthcare leaders with Matt Morton.
Hi, everybody. This is Matt Morton. Welcome to the Health City Podcast, where I talk with top healthcare leaders to uncover their rise to the highest levels of the industry and the most valuable insights that they learned along the way. Today's guest is orthopedic surgeon Dr. Vinod Dasa. Dr. Dasa is also an entrepreneur, innovator, and thought leader that is very well known throughout the medical community. During our conversation, we cover everything from how he got into the healthcare industry, what fostered his innovative drive, and his goals for the future of healthcare. Please welcome Dr. Vinod Dasa. Dr. Vinod Dasa, thanks for coming on the Health City Podcast today. Excited to go through your past. I know you've been a LinkedIn top voice, a top doc, and all of that. So I think we can get some great insights from you, and just really excited to hear about your story and your workup. So, first things first, how did you get into the healthcare industry?
So, I was a child of two physicians. And so I've been brought up around healthcare, obviously, my entire life. And I was applied for and actually got into med school in high school. So it was a 7-year combined bachelor's and MD program up in Albany. So I did a combined BS-MD program, then did my residency in Buffalo and spent 5 years there. And then did my fellowship in Manhattan with the Insull Scott Kelly Group, who are really essentially the inventors of the modern day knee replacement. Dr. Insull is one of the kind of pioneers, as were Dr. Scott and Kelly. So that was a really impressive training, both in Buffalo and in Manhattan. So
you knew pretty early. I mean, growing up, the son of two physicians, you knew pretty early that you wanted to get into to medicine.
Yeah, I think so. It kind of fit everything I wanted. And again, when you're brought up around something, you're just more comfortable with that concept. Probably just like in most professions, right? The kids follow somewhat in the footsteps of their parents, whether it's real estate or engineering or what have you. And so it kind of fit. And then I picked orthopedics fairly early in medical school. Started doing research, orthopedic research at Albany Medical College, my first year of med school, and really kind of just tried to create a path that I could easily follow. So it worked out well.
Yes. Was there any particular reason that you liked the orthopedic specialty, and then more specifically the adult reconstruction, specialty within?
I'd say just orthopedics in general, because I think if you're impatient, it's a good field to fit into. Because I could not sit there like primary care endocrinology or something like that and treat diabetes for the next 15 years. I needed to fix it like right then and there. So I think that's just my personality. I just don't have the patience to sit there. So I want to see somebody come in with a problem, and I want to see them leave with the issue fixed. And I just didn't have the brain power like some of the endocrinologists, neurologists, and all these other folks that their brains are just kind of constantly moving. I don't think I had that level of commitment to that much thinking. Not that orthopedics doesn't think, but I'm more of a doer than kind of contemplating things.
No, I like that. You want to be able to see your fix actually go into effect.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So and I'll tell you, that's one of the nice things about medicine as a profession, because it fits just about everybody's personality. So radiology, pathology, ophthalmology. You want to see patients. You don't want to see patients. You want to do stuff, or you want to think about things. You want to be in the OR. You want to be in the clinic. You want to, so it kind of fits everybody's personality. So I think that's one of the cool things about becoming a physician is, whatever you do, whatever fits who you are, you can find that specialty that you want to work with kids, or you want to work with adults. You know what I mean? So you want to do and work with kids, and it's a really fun profession if you've got kind of a very diverse group of people, and they can kind of find their own path. So it's really neat in that way.
It's a great point. I never really thought about that. Even within medicine itself, there's so many different specialties that fit so many different personalities. So you're 100% spot on there. So you go to med school, you go do your residency, your fellowship. What was next for you?
So it was interesting. So I finished my fellowship in 2007. And my wife is a family physician, and we were looking at opportunities. And New Orleans was post-Katrina. And so I got recruited to come down and interview at LSU in New Orleans post-Katrina, because I imagine, obviously it was decimated. And it was a very unique opportunity where someone coming right out of fellowship could actually spread your wings and develop whatever it is you want to develop out of the gate. You didn't have to ask permission. I mean, it was basically a clean canvas, if you will, because the prior faculty had left. It was a city in desperate need of help. So it checked a lot of boxes for me that I could kind of advance my career almost at warp speed right on day one, instead of kind of joining a more traditional academic program where you got to wait in line for the next 15 years until somebody retires and all the politics that goes along with that, where I could jump into a legitimate kind of well-respected national, if not international player and do what I want. So I don't think there was any opportunity like that, maybe back then or now, that's available. So we took a chance. We were both young. We had a young child, and we said, listen, if it doesn't work, that's fine. We're young. We can change gears and move on. But I'll tell you, being at LSU has opened a tremendous amount of doors. It's allowed me to really kind of develop what I wanted to develop from a research perspective, from a clinical practice perspective, from an entrepreneurial perspective, very quickly. And so I think that's why I've been able to create kind of a diverse portfolio of a career, purely because I took that chance early on in my career.
That's fantastic. So you said prior faculty left. When you were going in there, were you going into somewhat of a leadership position right away in terms of leading that department?
Yeah, well, unbeknownst to me, yes, from a certain perspective, because I mean, we had a chairman and obviously we had a dean and we had all of that, but kind of at the ground floor level, there was nobody. I went to my hospital. All of a sudden, I'm sitting in board meetings. I'm like 2 weeks into my practice. I'm like, what is this? And people are asking me. I mean, it was funny. So I had a supply chain meeting. I didn't even know what supply chain was. I'm like, I mean, who taught me what even supply chain is in med school and residency? I thought that was something from Toyota, right? So I'm sitting in these, my first like 3 months, they're doing an RFP to figure out what total joints to allow in the health system. And I'm like 5 months into my job and I'm trying to help figure out what implants like a health system needs. I'm like, this is crazy. I don't even know how to do my own technique yet, And so I was just thrust into this because there's no one else. It was a vacuum, right? And so when there's a void, then guess what? People will hopefully step up and fill that vacuum. And so that was me. I mean, they looked at me. They're like, next man up. I'm like, well, I'm looking around. I'm like, I'm the only one here. I guess I got to show up.
What an amazing way to get all of that experience, though. So many people never get that experience, right? You got to see all different levels of everything coming right in that way. I mean, an RFP, supply chain, things that you're not normally exposed to, and right away you're right in the thick of it. So
yeah, it was crazy. I'm sitting there with CEOs of this, that, and the other, and I'm like, okay.
So you seem like a pretty innovative guy from right up front, and then taking that role and being willing to take that risk. Did that feed into kind of how your career has gone as an advisor to other companies? How did that?
Yeah. So it has, in the sense that I think I've gained a fair amount of experience fairly quickly in my career, and I can hopefully leverage that moving forward. Whereas I think typically you'd probably need to get where I am after about 15, 20 years, and then start to connect those dots. So I think doing that when I was young and kind of dumb allowed me to make mistakes and make wrong turns and have people realize, well, he's just young and green and whatever, right? So I can kind of get away with it back then. Not now, but back then I could. And so that's what it has enabled me, I think, to help companies or help whoever kind of figure out healthcare, because I've been involved at a very deep level early on. And so I understand, GPOs and supply chain and RFPs and, all the process, right? So I think if you were to ask someone probably 10 years, 15 years into their practice now, kind of how the system works, they're still going to struggle because, at the beginning of your career, you're just nose to the ground, right? You're just grinding, seeing a bunch of patients, building your practice. You're not paying attention to all the other stuff of the system, right? But the system has to function. We're 20% of GDP. That just doesn't happen just because, right? So I think a lot of docs, it's not until their mid-career or tail end of their career where they've been involved in the system. Now they've got an established practice, so they got bandwidth now to kind of start looking at how healthcare works outside of just building a practice in those blinders. So because I got that experience early on, it's allowed me to kind of at a younger age establish the ability to kind of speak to different aspects of healthcare in a way that they probably don't get from someone at this point in their career.
Definitely.
And so
you have a wide lens on the industry as a whole.
Yeah.
When you were going into your career and you chose to take that role at LSU, did you have any specific goals for your career as a physician? I know obviously it was probably more patient facing, but did you have the goals of advising companies and getting on the innovation end of things?
No, I didn't. I came in thinking, all right, this is a unique opportunity, and I was really more into research. And so, how do I build a research infrastructure back? And I wanted to get LSU, at least our department, back to where it was pre-Katrina in terms of research and productivity and being innovators and all that kind of stuff. Because they had a very powerful reputation pre-Katrina, and so that was my goal, was to really just help get the department back where it needs to be. But kind of when you're in research and you're asking challenging questions and you're questioning why we do things, right, from an academic research perspective, it obviously lends itself kind of towards innovation, because you still ask those questions across the spectrum, not just in terms of a disease state, why do we see inflammation in this case but not this case, or whatever, but that same mentality, that same thinking then starts applying kind of in a business sense too. Why does the clinic or our office function this way? Why does the OR work this way? To me, it seems like it should be working this way, but not this way. Just like the same questions I was asking from a biological perspective, I start looking at healthcare from an efficiency and workflow and process perspective. Why do I book a case 2 months out, but no one realizes I have that surgery until the day before? I'm like, this doesn't make sense to me. Like, I don't get it. Why did the rep find out I had a case yesterday when I booked this thing 6 weeks ago? Like, and now everybody's scrambling at the last. I'm getting phone calls at the last minute about what I need for my case tomorrow. I'm like, but I told you about this 2 months ago. I put it in the surgery schedule. So I'm like, why is that? Why? So again, it's the same questions I was using from a biological perspective. I started asking from a workflow and process perspective and business perspective. And so kind of that just kind of evolved into these other things as people started realizing, hey, Dasa is kind of questioning what we're doing. He's out in left field here on some of these things, but he kind of makes sense. Maybe we should ask him more questions. And then it keeps going and going and going. And then, here we are.
Well, yeah, that's at the core of innovation, right? Is finding problems, identifying problems, and then trying to work towards a solution that's better than the one you have in place. So, it sounds like you're doing that on all different levels and where you're at right now. So for you, you're at LSU, you're starting your career and you're starting to build your career. What were some big milestones that you can remember where you saw your career progressing and you started getting into different sides of healthcare?
Yeah, so I think personally, one of the big milestones for me, it was more of a personal achievement when I started understanding. It probably took about 5 years, and for me to kind of establish who I am as a surgeon, right? When you come out of training, you just basically copy what you learned in residency and fellowship because you're scared, you're nervous, you got your boards. I don't want to push the envelope. I don't want to get in trouble. Just have a very clean practice. So what do? You just do what you learned, right? And then slowly you start realizing, well, I don't know why they did this in fellowship or residency. I don't know why they did the surgical technique this way, or I don't know why this step is done this way. What if I move it over here? What if I did this step first and then that step second? And then you do that because now you have the confidence to do it, right? You've done enough of these surgeries. You're a handful of years now in your practice. All right, you're like, I'm scared. I'm a little nervous, but let me just shift this one thing around because I think it works better for me. And all of a sudden, lo and behold, the surgery goes a little faster, a little better, a little easier, blah, 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 blah. And then you're like, oh, okay. And then you start evolving your practice, your skills, your surgical technique. And so it was around year 5 when I was like, all right, I got the hang of this, right? I've got the confidence now that I can do what I want to do and manage my surgery the way I want to manage, not the way I was taught to manage it, but use what I think works previously and adapt it to who I am and what I want to do. And that big milestone for me was around year 5, where I think I became kind of my independent, not just a copy of my training, but me, an independent surgeon. And that opened the door for me to start thinking about, all right, now that I have the confidence to do this, what are other things now that I can move the needle forward on, right? Not just kind of swim in a circle here, but how do I start swimming forward to kind of advance what I want to do. And so then I started that slow march towards where I am today clinically, which is outpatient opiate-free knee replacements. And so along the way, you meet reps and distributors and all these folks. Obviously, they're trying to get me to use their stuff, and I get it. But along the way, I started sharing kind of my philosophy as they called on me. And some reps and distributors were like, all right, whatever. He's talking all this fluffy stuff. I just want him to use my stuff. And I'm like, well, whatever, right? But every once in a while, you'll encounter someone that's like, oh, okay, this guy's really challenging the way things go, and this kind of fits how our company or our whatever thinks, or we're kind of looking for people that think this way and that kind of stuff. And there's one particular rep that had called on me, and she was talking about HA injections, gel injections for knee OA and all this stuff. And I talked to her about what I think about steroid injections, just philosophically, kind of biologically what I think. And she was like just constantly taking notes. And I still value her today, and I work with her today too. And she's like, all right, you know what? I like the way you think. I need to take your concepts and why you want to use these injections, not these injections. I get it, blah, 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 to her company. And then that's when I got introduced to the idea of working with industry and being a KOL and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I had no idea what I was doing. They sent me some contract. I'm like, oh, okay, you're going to pay me for something that I already believe in? Okay, fine. I'm not going to argue with this. And so then that opened the door and opened my eyes to what the opportunities were, and kind of grew from there. So those are kind of two main milestones for me that kind of gave me the confidence that I don't have to just sit there in the office and just see a bunch of patients and just go on this hamster wheel. That we can actually potentially change how the system works.
It's pretty amazing. You talk about it so often on this podcast, is the growth mindset. And it sounds to me like you have a pretty heavy growth mindset. It sounds like you're always looking to improve and move forward, which is, going to drive progression personally for you, but also within the industry. You're looking to create change in a positive way. And then from the rep, line that you mentioned, you found one rep that actually listened. And I mean, the power of actually listening and being engaged, right? It's so important. So I'm sure many reps, whoever listens to this, can learn from that and just see, look, if you're actively engaged with the person you're speaking with and you're actually interested in what they're seeing and saying, you can find solutions for that, and you're going to be able to work together more positively. So.
Yeah. What's that saying? Some people listen to respond. And some people
I think I just posted something about that the other day, and it's
listen to learn or something like that, right?
Yeah, and some people go into situations looking for affirmation versus information, but there's also the one that you were speaking with. Listen.
Yeah, so and you can see that, right? I mean, you're sitting there, because obviously we've got a busy practice. The rep is coming in. They got 2.3 minutes to spend with me, right? And they're busy like selling their thing, and they have no clue who I am or what I'm thinking, right? You could have taken that 2.5 minutes to really understand me. And if you did, that probably would have magically turned into 10 minutes, right? And then from there, who knows? And I probably could have sat there and told my next patient, hold on a minute, I've got something. And then all of a sudden we're there for 30.
It's great. Right? Some people listen to learn. Some people listen just to wait for their chance to talk. Something along those lines. But it's true. So, no, those are great milestones. And then tell me a little bit about Site Medical.
Yeah. So this was born out of my frustration about how the system works. Because I'm sitting here looking at how distributors and device representatives and companies and hospitals all interact with each other. And it's a complete mess. It is a complete mess. We're 2021 and the system still works like it's 1980. We're using robots and lasers and this and that, and yet the workflow and the process around the nuts and bolts of how healthcare works, if you peel away the layers of the onion, it's just it looks like rotten wood, and it's just amazing to me. We have that best healthcare theoretically in the world, and yet we've got these processes that are so archaic and so outdated. It made no sense to me. And so I wanted to kind of create a tool, and this was in conjunction with Oshner, to kind of help support the OR staff, the reps, the distributors, and everyone kind of in a new way. And if you think about it, what I was realizing is surgeries are getting more and more complex. these workflows and processes were designed for surgery that was from 1970, right? Where we probably did 5 different surgeries. That's it. Probably hernia, a gunshot to the belly. I think back then we were using open techniques to take a meniscus out for knee surgery, not arthroscopy. There's no endoscopy, arthroscopy, no keyhole surgery. That stuff didn't exist. Everything was open, and we all did 5 things. And in fact, general surgery was doing orthopedics back then. And, that's all, and so those workflows have stuck. And what's happened is our processes haven't evolved to match, where healthcare and surgery is going. And so I was like, and I was looking at my surgical techs, they're struggling to cover these cases, right? I'd ask for something and everyone looks at me like I have 3 eyeballs, and I've been here for 10 years and I'm asking the same thing 10 years later. I didn't get it, right? And the reps are scrambling around like chickens, trying to put out fires and filling cracks everywhere and help the serial processing and all that. And I'm like, the whole system doesn't make sense, because we're going to this more efficient state and we don't have the systems in place to go there. And so that led to kind of the creation of Site Medical, and how to create tools and resources to enable reps and hospitals and surgical techs and surgeons to all start working more collaboratively together, as opposed to this constant food fight of us versus them. You're the enemy. You're what's making healthcare crumble, and then they're looking at you, but you can't do this without me. And there's this constant, like this, I don't know, just friction, when it should be really this seamless kind of teamwork process. And so that's why I developed or helped develop Site Medical, was to create kind of that technology to enable everybody to collaboratively work together and create a win-win. Because ultimately, nothing moves unless all the important stakeholders get something out of it. Because if there's a win-lose, then there's going to be a lot of headwind, and adoption and everything else just goes down the tubes, right? So you've got to find areas where people can work together, where they can find wins together. And I think when you find that alignment and that synergy, that's when your product or your solution or whatever it is you've created has the best chance of success.
It's a great point, and it feeds into exactly what I was going to ask you next, which is Doc Social, because to me, you brought up the fact that there's friction sometimes, and there's always going to be a friction in different workplaces. But the more that you can create synergy, which is what you were looking to do there between, say the reps and physicians, the better things are going to move forward. So Doc Social, tell me a little bit about that. I know you co-founded that with Dr. Alok Sharan. It seems like you guys are having great success. I mean, I'm seeing posts about it all the time. It looks like you're getting great engagement. What was the whole philosophy behind founding that?
Yeah. So actually, this was Alok and David Flickinger's brainchild. So Alok was going to do a conference on his new Awake Spine Surgery program, a training conference in Seattle, right around Memorial Day. I think it was thereabouts of 2020. So all of a sudden, COVID hits, and he had to cancel that conference. And that was going to be his kind of coming out, groundbreaking, meeting and to kind of get awareness of what he was doing, which is impressive. And obviously they had to cancel it. So he and David started thinking about, all right, well, if we can't do this, then what does that mean? Like, what's the game plan moving forward? Because we didn't know when COVID would end and all this stuff. And so they were like, all right, so then what is the new way of learning and education and connecting and collaborating and all this stuff moving forward? And so they started Doc Social with the intent originally of being a platform to teach and train surgeons, kind of like a masterclass type thing for physicians. So then they asked me to kind of come on board, and I said, guys, I think there's more here than just that. And I think there's an opportunity to kind of develop this into something broader and more compelling. That's not simply a me too of a lot of other things. And I said, and one of the things I was pitching them on was the fact that healthcare is becoming more democratized. It's not a physician-only decision-making environment anymore, right? And if you think that decisions are just me running into the CEO's office, thumping my chest, saying, I want X, Y, and Z, you probably need to find another profession, because you don't get it and you don't understand where healthcare is going. So if you look now at healthcare, most decision-making is done with an interdisciplinary approach, right? It's multi-stakeholder of the people in the health system. It's physical therapy, it's pharmacy, it's nursing, it's the COO, it's administration, it's the surgeon, it's everybody at the table. Before, it was a rectangular table with the surgeon somewhere being next to the CEO at the head. Now it's becoming more and more oval, if not circular. And so if that's the case, then who do you engage in healthcare right now? Right. And a lot of companies still think it's just me, and I'm going to carry all of this on my shoulders and get whatever it is you want into the system. So you're going to make whatever money you want to make. And again, that's so outdated because now you've got to convince everyone around me that this is important, not just me. Right. So now me as a physician, I introduce or I initiate an idea or a concept or champion it within the system. But I'm not going to be the one that writes the check and does the final box check to write the actual check for you, right? And you don't realize that. And so my point with Doc Social was we need to create a platform where you're engaging the entire system to understand whatever concept you're trying to get to, because you have to convince everybody now, not just me, because we're all value conscious now, right? It's not a blank check anymore. So you don't just have to convince me with your glossy, shiny brochure. You've got to convince everybody. So for example, if you've got a product that enhances the recovery of a patient after surgery, right? I mean, obviously, as a surgeon, I'd be interested in that. But who else does that impact and does it touch? So just from an orthopedic perspective, right? Just simple example, the therapists that manage the patient post-operatively, right, actually see the benefit more powerfully than I do, right? So when you're developing a product that's helping the patient in the post-operative space, why aren't you trying to convince the physical therapist of how good your product is and convince them that they should be talking to me to use it during surgery? Because there it can actually vouch for how it's working, right? So if you're a device company, for example, I bet you've never, ever thought about talking to a physical therapist, right? But yet they are a key stakeholder that's so important that I respect as a physician and as a surgeon, their opinion. But yet you've completely ignored them. But yet they're the ones actually receiving the benefit of your product because you're making the therapy that much easier, faster, and better for them and the patient, right? So then is there a platform to connect those dots?
Now there is.
Now there is, right? And if you look at the existing platforms, they're fairly siloed, right? It's only physicians, only nurses, only pharmacists, only this. But healthcare is so interdisciplinary now in terms of decision making, but yet the communication right now is siloed. So you can see that disconnect, right? So now you can see the opportunity that's there to start connecting the dots. And to me, it's amazing. We represent 20% of the US economy. After COVID, we probably represent 80% because we just shut the whole world down. Healthcare did,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
I mean, healthcare just shut the entire globe down. It wasn't car manufacturing. It wasn't, food. It was healthcare just shut the whole world down. So maybe we're not 20% of the economy. We actually impact a lot more. But yet no one knows how to engage healthcare.
It's a great point. And I think it's so important because you're getting the ability, a digital environment, to have these really broad, encompassing conversations, like you just said. And when you're trying to bring a new product into healthcare, it's so important to know every single one of the stakeholders. And now there's a digital platform for people to go on, have those conversations, and engage all of those different stakeholders in one place. So, I mean, it looks like you guys are having great success thus far, and there's a good reason for it. There was a need. Right. And you're putting that out there. And I can imagine there's going to be a lot of great things that come from it and the conversations that are had on the platform.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, and I think we're seeing growth in the areas where we're definitely differentiated. So, for example, in the collaboration group section, right, that thing has exploded, where you've got nurses asking reps questions and reps asking supply chain questions and a therapist asking a pharmacist about something. It's just like you see this kind of cross-pollination and these discussions happening, and you got a group on entrepreneurship, and reps are now getting involved with physician entrepreneur. I mean, it's just everything's just starting to get mixed up.
It's great too, because the more I'm thinking about it right now is normally in those situations, if you want to ask those questions, you might have to go into the actual facility, find those people, try to ask the questions and have the conversations. And it's not as free of an environment, right? People aren't going to be as open, wanting to talk. It's a work environment. But now on this digital platform, you're not only getting those stakeholders, but you're getting those stakeholders that want to have these conversations with each other. Right. So you're getting that even more powerful conversation, and you get feedback that you need. So,
yeah, and so for example, supply chain, right? So there are some supply chain folks out there that really want to engage the vendors. There's some that don't. They're mortal enemies, and so. But you've got folks now that are willing and wanting to engage in a way that they've never had an opportunity to do it before. And so that's what's fun. You're seeing a lot of people ask questions of each other that they've never had the opportunity to do so.
It's amazing. Sky's the limit on that. And next up, I did want to mention this, LinkedIn Top Voice 2018. What does that mean exactly? And what got you so active on LinkedIn? Because I know you're laughing, and I think it's important. I didn't get active on LinkedIn, and I still struggle to get active on LinkedIn. But I think putting your thoughts out there to other people is such an important thing because it makes you stand behind things you're saying.
So, I started looking. So part of my entree into LinkedIn was somewhat selfish with Site Medical because I just wanted to put some things out there about Site Medical in the beginning. So it's funny because I was not a social media guy. I'm like, who wants to know how many times I went to the bathroom? Like, why is that important to somebody? I don't get this, right? Like, do you really need to know what I ate last night? Like, no, right? Yeah. So, because I had a very skewed view of social media. But someone convinced me to say, hey, you're starting this new company and you got this new product, just throw it on there. I'm like, what do you got to lose? I'm like, okay, fine. So, so I put a post up and I forgot what it was. I went to Whole Foods and that was right when Amazon put out the lockers, right, in Whole Foods. And I was like, holy cow, this is kind of cool. I can, I don't have to go to UPS. I don't go anywhere. I just literally go like 2 blocks away and stick this in a locker and I'm done. I'm like, why, you're seeing this on this side of the economy. Why can't we see this on the healthcare side of it, right? And I think I had a picture of a fax machine because we still fax. It's 2021 and all the offices still have a fax machine, right? To me, that's mind-boggling. And I'm like, why isn't healthcare like this? And I gave that example of the Amazon locker, and I'd kind of put some segue thing into Site Medical and try to make that connection. And like, I'm looking at that post and all of a sudden it's like 50,000 views, like in like 6 hours. I'm like, what? And then next thing I know, like I get up next morning, it's like 150,000 views. I'm like, what the heck? And then I look in the next afternoon, it's like 250,000 views about an Amazon locker. I'm like, what is this? Like how, and so then I started realizing, I'm looking at the comments and what was intriguing to me is what I was thinking and how I viewed something. I did not appreciate the amount of variation of ideas and interpretations of what I thought was a very simple concept. It opened my eyes because this person viewed my post this way, which I totally didn't even see. And then this person's viewing it a whole different way that I totally didn't appreciate and see. And then someone kind of posted a comment on it about, so this is how physicians think or something like that. I was like, holy cow. This is really neat in the sense that you can take a simple concept and really get this kind of global perspective that I've never gotten before. Because in my world, it was just, it was my little tribe, my sphere of influence, and that's all I knew, right? And I didn't know how someone in Nigeria thought or how someone in Seattle thought about this that worked at Amazon, right? And all of a sudden now I'm like, whoa. And so 2 things. Number one, I didn't realize the power of just basic ideas and understanding how people think and appreciating different perspectives in a way that I had never seen before. And number 2, the voice of a physician rarely gets heard. You've got all of these national agendas and policy agendas, and physicians, generally speaking, just like I said, put your nose to the ground and just grind through it. And we don't vocalize how we think. And I think we're an important part of not only healthcare, but the economy, right? Again, we shut down the whole world. Physicians did to a certain extent. And yet we're completely quiet on just about everything, right? It's somebody else's problem because I'm busy taking care of patients. Don't bother me, right? I've got this noble thing that I need to get done. So don't bother me. But then at the same time, yeah, you're being noble, but everyone's walking all over you, right? So this high and mighty kind of, leave me alone altruism thing, that's great. But at the end of the day, what makes the world move, right? It's not your generosity. It's the dollar. And so if we don't get in the game and talk about our perspective and talk about what we're seeing and how what's happening is impacting patients at the ground level, then who else is going to say that? Because I think we have one of the most respected voices, right? I mean, society trusts us in a way that they trust very few other people. And so if we don't leverage that ability to kind of move the needle in the direction that we collectively as a profession see it needs to be moved, then we deserve the bed that we're sleeping in. We have no one else to blame. We have fallen asleep at the steering wheel, right? And so stop complaining because you're seeing patients. That's not good enough anymore, right? And so that realization started coming to me and said, all right, people value what I'm saying. I think, whether it's, talking about something I created or just general concepts in general, I think there's value in people understanding how physicians think. And so I just, I just started posting more and more things just from the lens of me as a practicing physician. Hey, I saw a patient that had bone-on-bone arthritis, but yet didn't have any pain. This is how crazy our understanding of biology is, right? And then all of a sudden, everyone's, it's a recent post I just did, and I don't know how many views. I mean, it's like some 15,000 views or whatever it is, and I'm like, this, no one ever gets to see how we think and why we think, and I think physicians need to get more involved so people understand our perspective because it's respected, and I think rightfully so. We've earned the ability to ask for that respect. I'm not shy about it. I take pride in that. We worked hard to get to where we are. And so I don't want to discount that, right? Physicians serve a very valuable role. And so let's take pride in that, right? Let's celebrate it. And let's tell people how we think things should move. Whether they listen to us or not, that's fine. But we can be at the table. And this is an easy way for us to be at the table on our time and on our terms.
It's true. And that was such a powerful story, actually, because I think a lot of people look at social media the way that you mentioned at first, right? I'm not into social media. I'm not into just posting. Who wants to hear from me? But what you found in doing that is one, you're understanding how important it is to put your voice out there. But two, you're getting such a wide-ranging perspective from all the other people who are going to engage with that. And getting the perspective from everybody out there is so important because it gives you feedback and it lets you tailor your own perspective because you're starting to understand the collective, right? What do I think? What do these thousands of other people think? And why should I maybe consider that, in my opinion? So it's so important, and there's so many great benefits to it. So I think that's amazing, your experience on that. Now you post that one post, and it just somewhat went viral and pushed you into it. So fantastic. So being a leader and innovator in the orthopedic setting, I want to get some recommendations from you. First, what are some characteristics that you believe are important to successfully innovate and lead in the healthcare setting?
I think it's understanding who the buyer and the user are in healthcare because they're completely disconnected. And it's understanding the perspective of each one of those folks. So if you're going to innovate, again, the fundamental question you need to ask is who's going to buy this and why? Right? Because trust me, there are a tremendous number of problems that need to be solved. And, we can, when you're in healthcare, you just look all around, you're like, oh, we could solve this problem doing this and we can create that. And if there was an app for this and blah, 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 there's issues all over the place. But at the end of the day, if you're going to innovate and create a viable product in the market, who's going to pay for it and why? And so that's the fundamental question. I think as physicians, or just as typical providers in healthcare, you see so many issues. You're like, oh, we should solve that, right? Yeah, we should, but, right, it's not going to happen for free. And so I think that's one of the big things to appreciate if you're going to innovate in health, probably any industry, but healthcare really, because it doesn't follow the normal financial model that you see in other industries, right? If you're going to create a widget for car manufacturing or for planes or food processing or whatever. In healthcare, the buying and the purchasing and the using are so disconnected, and the impact of what you do may not necessarily be measurable, right? Even though it could make a huge impact. So for example, you develop something that creates reduced pain after surgery, right? Maybe you got an innovation that drops pain by 50%. Okay, that's important, right? I don't think anyone's going to dispute that that's important. But then who's going to pay for it and why, right? Because the patient's not going to pay for it, even though they're the one benefiting from it because they have insurance and they're not going to pay out of pocket. So then who's going to pay for it? Me, the surgeon? I'm going to pay an extra, it's coming out of my pocket to reduce your pain by 50%? Probably not going to happen. Okay, so then is it going to come out of the hospital's pocket? Maybe, but then I've got to fight real hard for that, right? Now, am I going to burn all my political capital? Because what's the return on that pain reduction? Is it more volume? So are we going to use it to market? So you can see how complex it gets for something that intuitively is so simple. Why wouldn't we develop an innovation to reduce pain? Like, that's a no-brainer. But at the end of the day, who's going to use it and why are you going to pay for it?
It's a great point. It's a great point, and it's things that you have to consider when you're bringing a product into the healthcare space. So we spoke earlier. You have a great lens into the healthcare industry with the experience you've had at LSU. Are there one or two key things that you learned earlier in your career that you think would benefit people who are, in the early stages of their career?
Yeah, I think the key thing I learned was when you're young, you can take risks. And, like for example, coming to New Orleans, it was, I could have very easily gone and plugged into a very, an orthopedic machine practice anywhere in the country, and just see a bunch of patients and crank out a lot of cases and kind of just do the typical thing. But I thought, all right, here's an opportunity here. Let me get out of my comfort zone a little bit. I'd never been to the South. I'd never been to New Orleans ever, not even for partying, nothing. So, but I was young and I was willing to take a chance. And I think in healthcare, physicians, generally speaking, are very risk averse, which is probably part of the reason we went to become a physician, because it's a very, very predictable field. And we're not exposed to the ups and downs of things like the traditional economy is, and so you're dealing with a very risk averse population, and so to take risk early on and develop an appetite to accept either failure or success, I think is really important. And, it's easy to say that, but when you got a family to feed and you've got a mortgage to pay, am I going to go out and take a risk and put all of that on the line or some of that on the line? So you got to have, your plan B, and you got to have, so you have to, I think, constantly start thinking about, if X happens, then Y needs to happen, or then we move on to Z, and so what are the redundancies and resiliencies you can build into your career and into your profession and things like that, so you can take those risks and not be out on a limb, necessarily.
It's a great piece of advice. I mean, taking risks is so correlated with success, and not just in a one case scenario. You got to be able to take many to have that real one case of success, and it gets harder to do as you get older because you have more responsibilities and financial obligations. So I think that's a great point to put out there. Now, how about any recommendations, for people who want to rise the ranks in the healthcare setting, whether that be a provider, an innovator, administrator, a thought leader?
I think what you have to do is be able to connect with all the stakeholders. So when I started out in practice, I was like, I was getting frustrated with all these other folks because they just didn't get it, right? And I thought I had the answers, and I thought I was the one that, and I also felt that responsibility, like I have to come up with the answer. I'm the doctor, like everyone's looking to me, and so and if it's not my way, it's the highway, those kinds of things. And I think if you want to rise through the ranks, you've got to understand all the different constituencies, all the different stakeholders. You have to appreciate their pain points, and you have to try to walk in their shoes, right? It's not just your perspective. Why do they think that way? Why do they look at me that way? What is it they're seeing that I'm missing? Because I'm not seeing what they're seeing, right? And I'm butting heads, and so let me kind of put myself in their shoes. Let me see what they're seeing. And I think a lot of physicians don't do that. I think a lot of, not even physicians, just people in general, they're on a mission, they're trying to accomplish X, Y, and Z, but they're having trouble doing it. And the reason is because they don't have the ability to look at it from someone else's perspective of why they're saying no or why they're saying maybe, right? So why is it? Because you think you think you solve the problem or you have the answer, but you're not that smart, right? Even though you think you are. And so I think it's really having the ability to kind of look at things from different perspectives and having the desire to do so and not have the blinders on, I think will help people kind of raise through the ranks, whatever you are. And to kind of be, if your aspiration is to become a leader or in a leadership role, I think is to take a minute and figure out kind of why the other person is thinking that way.
I think it's so important what you just said, and we hear it so often with different leaders on this podcast is, how important the emotional intelligence portion is to rising the ranks and growing and just having personal development. And what I think people can glean from this and what you're saying is it's so important to, regardless of your personal mission, to take a step back and see how it affects other people. See what other people want and be willing to listen. I mean, the importance of listening, you've already mentioned it a few times before this, is so crucial to having good relationships because other people have their own mission. And you have to be able to help that further along if they're going to support yours as well. So it's just understanding all the different stakeholders, like you said, and getting their perspective and making sure that, what your mission is looking to accomplish, if you need them involved, that it's helping them accomplish theirs as well.
Exactly. No, you're dead on. I agree.
So, all right. What is your single most valuable attribute?
Whoa.
It's a tough one.
I think it's a great question. I think it is trying to listen to learn. And I'm working to it, and I still haven't gotten there. I want to listen, but I want to respond. But I think I'm making a lot of progress to trying to sit there and constantly remind myself, what are they saying? Why are they saying it? How are they saying it? And what's the meaning behind it? And so I think that's the journey I'm on, and I think that's an attribute that I'm proud to be working on.
I think that's a great journey to be on, and I think that's one that just is ever going. And the more you can work on it, the better. It's just going to help you that much more. So let's go current status with your practice and research. I know we spoke earlier, and you mentioned some pretty cool things you're working on the research side of things. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we've, probably over the last 4 years-ish, I've really spent a lot of time investing in the research infrastructure for our department here at LSU. And so we've got kind of 4 divisions in our research department. One is kind of classic clinical trial stuff and industry-funded clinical trials, a new drug, and we're just part of that. We are doing kind of the classic clinical research, retrospective chart reviews, and things that you typically expect that you see in most journals and things like that. But the 2 areas that we're really focusing on that I think is kind of adding innovation is leveraging our local clinical experience to solve kind of really pressing needs. And by that, I mean health disparities and inequities in healthcare. So I'm obviously practicing in Southern Louisiana, the Gulf Coast. We have a disproportionate share of health disparities and inequities compared to a lot of other places in the country. And so you have to be living under a rock if you don't appreciate kind of where we're changing as a society now and trying to figure out, how do we create more equity across the board. And obviously in healthcare is where I am and where I potentially or we can help look at things. And so what I wanted to do is figure out, how do we leverage this, good or bad, however you want to call it, health disparities here to answer some of these more pressing questions. And so over the last few years, we've really not pivoted, but we've shifted our focus a little bit to start looking at answering questions from the health disparities and inequity lens. And so the last 2 areas that we've really developed over the last few years is our big data research program and challenging a lot of these large data projects to look at things from a lens of health disparities and inequities. And so, for example, we're working with the AAOS, American Joint Replacement Registry, to start asking questions from a inequity or health disparities perspective around implants and implant utilization. We're using large data sets to understand, complication rates and things relative to race and socioeconomic status and things like that. Now, the one area that's really novel and I think innovative is our healthcare tissue repository. So we are banking biospecimens, tissue from all of our total joint surgeries, and we're putting it in a lab. And each one of those tissue specimens is linked with a huge amount of clinical data on each one of those patients, including social determinants of health. So socioeconomic status, race, insurance, all the things that potentially can impact the outcome of the patient that we traditionally have not paid attention to. And so after each surgery, that tissue gets banked. Each one of those tissue specimens has all of this information linked to it to ask the fundamental question of how do environmental factors impact biology, which then impact outcomes, clinical outcomes, for example, after surgery. And so the example I give is bone quality, right? So poor bone quality probably leads to poor outcomes after surgery, right? And so patients generally have more pain or poor function, whatever it is, and we see poor outcomes with bone quality. So the next question is why does the patient have a problem with bone quality? Is it purely because they're just older? Or maybe they live in a food desert and had poor access to nutrition, which is why they have poor bone quality, which is why we have poor outcomes. Okay. So as we march down this road to measuring quality and pay for performance and value-based medicine, if you have poor outcomes after surgery, guess what? I'm getting a less reimbursement. Okay. So we have the potential here, if we don't understand what's going on, to marginalize patients that are already marginalized. You have poor bone quality. Chances are you may live in a food desert, which means racially or socioeconomically, you're in a specific cohort of patients, but your outcomes are poor. So guess what? I'm not going to operate on you because we're going to take a financial hit. So we've already marginalized a group of people, and now we're marginalizing them even more. So how do we understand what's going on? How do we get our hands around